Hello, everyone. Welcome to Elephants in the Room, where we'll be tackling the big topics like mental health, technology, the LGBTQ, and more. Our goal is to encourage and empower parents to be bold in having difficult conversations with their kids and teens. We have 6 awesome speakers that we can't wait for you to hear. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so this morning, you guys are in for a treat. We have a special guest, Jeremiah Taylor. We're going to introduce him in just a second. He's talking about substance abuse, so he's going to hit drugs, alcohol. Now, here's the thing, is like I know some of you who have little ones, you're like, this doesn't really apply to me yet, but man, the fact that you're in here this morning, you're doing a lot of work on the front end, and it will hopefully pay off when you hit maybe some of those years when it's more prevalent. This is a really big topic, and there's a lot of emotion with it as well. And so just thank you for being here. Let me introduce you a little bit. Let me pull out my notes officially, Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. He is trained in EMDR, which, in case you don't know what that is, it is like a very great specialty. Eye movement desensitization, EMD, what's the R? And reprocessing. See, it's like hardcore. But in all seriousness, people who've done EMDR, like they like I can't begin to tell you how much they sing its praises. So the fact that he's trained in that, like that gives him automatic respect. He's also a certified sex addiction therapist, developing a special focus on helping individuals and families recover from process and substance addictions. He's worked in cross-cultural contexts, church-based ministry. He's a member at Downtown Church of Christ in Searcy. He's also done medical clinics integrating mental health. He's dedicated his professional life to helping people face 3 of life's greatest challenges: addictions, trauma, and relationships. So Jeremiah, thank you for joining us. You guys didn't know, but man, before when we were just talking and introducing, he's got such a sweet and humble spirit. And so we're just really grateful you're here, Jeremiah.
Thank you for that introduction. It's good to be here with you guys this morning. This is such an important topic, and I think just the fact that you're sitting here tells me already that you know this is serious, that this matters. And as I share some things with you this morning, I hope to kind of open your eyes to some things about the realities of how drugs and alcohol affect you, but also how we have opportunities to grow through our interactions with it, and how it affects our family can turn into something that God uses to strengthen us and to draw us closer to Him. And I do believe that there is great hope in this area of our lives. I'm seeing so many people heal through addiction and come out the other side as people that have great faith and great love and great gratitude for life. So that's really why I am involved with this area of spectrum of life and treatment, is I do believe healing does happen and God is at work. If we'll just have the willingness to receive that and to work towards it. A lot of my experience has to do with professional, but also it's very personal. I have buried a brother for a lifetime of alcohol use. I've also had a child who struggled for a few years with this issue, and our family has been personally impacted by that. And so this is not something far away and from a book. This is something that we all deal with. And just for that, I wanted to ask you guys, if you would just mind, if you have somebody in your family or somebody that you know that has been affected by drugs or alcohol use, would you just raise your hand? And then look around the room. And you're in good company. Thank you. I appreciate your willingness to respond to that. It's amazing when we have children, when that child is born, there's this time in our life where we just look at this child as a dream. Like there's these dreams we have for our child. You think about what are they going to be like when they're 5, 10, 15 years old. You think about them growing up and the skills they're going to have, the way you're going to have celebrations and holidays, and you're going to get to see them get married and have children of their own, and all these dreams on your daughter, on your son, that you hope to have fulfilled. And then something happens, and those dreams turn into nightmares, and then you can't wake up because they're your life. And that's what happens when we get sucked into these patterns of addiction with drugs and alcohol. And in that nightmare, that's where people come and they've realized this pain is so great, I can't do this on my own. I don't know what to do. I've run out of answers. And that's usually the point where we seek help. But what I want to tell you is that's also the open door for recovery to begin. When we finally reach a point where it's like we realize this is not just a passing thing, this nightmare is real, that's also when we begin to ask for help and we begin our recovery process. We seek truth, we cry out to the Lord in prayer, we reach out to one another, and that process actually is like the beginning point of, through our suffering, our character develops. Through our acknowledgement of addiction, that's where our recovery begins, and we start to find life in this recovery process. And the people that I have walked with and experienced other people who've walked through addiction, some of the people with the most humility, the most gratitude, the most love and appreciation for life, the biggest zeal for living are people who have gone through addiction. Because this process really chisels away at some of our idols and some of the character flaws. It really opens us up to becoming incredible people. And so that's what I have seen. And even just last week, I was talking to one of my guys that I worked with 15 years ago. And at that time, he had completely destroyed anything positive in his world. He hated his parents, and he had basically run out of all options. He had burned all of his bridges. He faced that process, and today I was talking with him, and he was talking about his love for his family, his love for his parents. He's found a beautiful woman to share his life with. They got married, they've had children, and now he's actually moving to a different community so that he can be part of an organization that will give life to others who have dealt with addiction. And I just see that kind of story play out over and over and over again. So while there is some bad news that I do need to share with you, I want to make sure we set the table appropriately, that this has a lot of good news on the back end if we're willing to follow that. Does that make sense? So, what is it that we're created for? I think we're created for connection. I think that's at the God's heart, is He loves us and He created us to be connected with Him, to draw our life from Him first, and then to love one another and to love our community. We are created to be connected. And that's what I see when I come in this room. I see people who are created for connections. So I just want to have a little bit of interaction with you right now. I want to ask you to think about what is a way this week that you have felt connected to someone. So you don't have to answer out loud on that one, but just as what is something that you have experienced this week as a connection with another person? And just allow yourself to just kind of really enjoy that thought of like, what was that moment? Was it a conversation? Was it a smile? Was it time spent together doing something that you love? I got to go on a walk through the ice with my wife a couple days ago and just see the crystals on the tree as the sun was shining at. That was one of my good connection moments this week. Here, I do want to ask you to respond is, what is a way that this church does a good job of connecting? And anybody can speak up. Just want to get a couple of, what are some things that this church does a good job of connecting? Can you give me some examples? I'm not from here, from Searcy, so I'm just really interested in what you would say. Say it again. Okay. What else? Classes like this, yeah. Really opens the door to being able to, you're in this together. Thank you. What else? Meals. Meals together are a huge connection point, aren't they? Yeah. Wonderful children's ministry. Thank you. And I know that there are so many more. But these are part of what give us life. This is what God's created us for. And from God's way of building us to be made for connection, that's actually the same exact pathway that gets hijacked for substance abuse. That's why it is so devastating, is because the very thing that was supposed to be connecting ends up becoming something that tears us apart. So one of the big questions that we have to ask is, why do our children get drawn to drugs and alcohol? And I want to be clear, this is not just a children's issue, this is a generational issue. We can speak about how our children are attracted to these things, but the biggest impact that I believe happens is that our generations are being impacted. How our grandparents were dealing with alcohol and drugs, how our parents, how we deal with drugs and alcohol are passed down to our children, and how we function, how we do life. That's a generational thing. So from the standpoint of the most damage done, it's our generation to generation of drug and alcohol use. But the reality is we all have drugs and alcohol in our families. And so what are the things that our children, why do they start using drugs and alcohol? I think one of the obvious things is that they're readily available. We have drugs and alcohol in our communities. It's not hard to get. Number two is one of the big things for our children. They long to be connected to their peers. We are made to be connected, and when that seems to be made easier by drug and alcohol use, that's really hard to resist. Sometimes it's just experimenting as part of our curiosity. We are made to be curious. We have minds that are exploring. What am I missing out on, right? Sometimes use is really just about, I'm just curious. Sometimes we do have pain in our life that we don't know what to do with. We don't know how to process it, and we discover that drugs or alcohol have a way of making those feelings easier to deal with, maybe even make us have some relief from stress. That's a big help. If you find a way to not feel as bad, some people are like, well, why not? Another thing is, especially for children, when the world seems very unstable and we're not very confident in ourselves yet, drugs and alcohol are pretty consistent at what they give you. You can count on them affecting you a certain way. Our family's way of coping. Sometimes our patterns in our family are a big part of how drugs and alcohol become a major option. Sometimes it's the draw of, I have a secret. I get to do something that is on the secret, down low type of thing. I have something that I can hold on to that other people don't know about. That can be attractive as a child. And I think even deeper, as you go deeper, the promise of ecstasy, joy, knowledge. It's like Adam and Eve at the beginning had all the good promises of God. But the temptation was God's holding out on you. God's holding out, and he was. But what he was holding out was all that was wicked, all that was evil, the dark side of all of those freedoms. And that's still what drugs and alcohol promise. There's these things on the other side that really do exist, but the damage that can be done is really devastating. One of the deep longings of our heart is to be loved and to be loved, and drugs and alcohol do a great job of making us think we're being loved well. So those are really why our children go to drugs and alcohol. So let me share some statistics in Arkansas. Out of 10 high school students, seniors, 5 have tried alcohol, 3 drink alcohol, and 2 binge drink. So 50% of our high school seniors, that's going to be pretty average. Marijuana use, more than half of the drug-related arrests in Arkansas were connected to marijuana. The opioid use, this is really a hard one because this is a major tool in our medical community to deal with pain, but it is extremely damaging and when it takes over as an addiction. And in 2017, there was a record-setting turn in your meds, and 14 tons of expired prescription drugs were turned in. You think about those little pills. Imagine how many it takes to have 14 tons. And that's how prevalent opioids are in our community. Stimulant use. Nearly 16 million people ages 12 and older currently report using stimulants, including meth, for non-medical reasons. So these are all pretty big statistics. One of the big things that I am encouraged by that you guys are here today is that statistically, 70% of users who try an illegal drug before the age of 13 will develop a substance abuse disorder within the next 7 years. That's compared to 27% of those who try illegal drugs after age 17. So just the fact that we're protecting our children or trying to encourage them to hold off on experimenting with drugs and alcohol, the longer that they can wait and not be exposed to those, the longer that their lives are going to be filled with positive, healthy, stress-reducing types of behaviors. And so the longer that we can put off that initial use, the long-term damage goes way down. The difference is 70% to 27%. So if nothing else, I hope you hear that and think about how important it is that you're intervening in your child's life. You're helping fill their life with things that are positive and life-giving. And for the sooner we get exposed to these drugs and alcohol, the greater the damage is done. So even from that, just being able to have that window of time while the brain and the emotions and the hearts and relationships are developing, statistically what that shows is the longer that's put off, the less the damage is going to be. So I think one of the important things is to have a definition of what is addiction. And we can dig deep and find lots of explanations that go really far, but I think a really basic way to think about it is addiction is at the point that a pleasurable loss of control, of contact with reality. We're no longer in contact with reality. And maybe sometimes it's just an escape, but it is the illusion of a met need. A pleasurable loss of contact with reality and escape in the illusion of met needs. That's what addiction really is. And you can put alcohol and drug use in there. You can also put other types of behaviors in there, but it's that loss of contact. So think back to, we're made for connection. Addiction is the loss of connection. It's the numbing. It's the separating from. So that's part of why when we have the hole in our heart that is created for God and for connections with people, and we put something in there besides God, it never satisfies. We need more and more and more. And that's where that loss of contact with reality really takes off. And we think we're getting our needs met, when in reality what we're doing is we're going away from getting our needs met. So it's important to think about, there are different levels of damage that can be done. There are different levels of use. And so I want you to think about 3 stages. The first stage would be hazardous use, and that's harmful. It's where we have been using this substance to a degree that it's starting to cause some problems in our life, but it's more casual. We can kind of bounce back. We've still have most of our life that we get to be a part of. The second level is abuse, and where that level is where we become more and more secretive of our use. We're separating from the things that would be healthy in our life. We start to replace good things in our life with things that are just purely that drug and alcohol use. That level, that's abuse. And then you take that to another level, you continue, and it's like an exchange from healthy to unhealthy, from life to death. At a dependence level, that's where my life really is centered around exclusively trying to get the next high. And that level is dependence. And so it's important to think about this, because if our child has a bottle of alcohol, it doesn't mean they're dependent on alcohol. And we're going to talk about that in a second, of just like, how do we tell the difference of where our child is at what stage are they at in their involvement with the drugs and the alcohol. So in the professional diagnosis of addiction, they have come up with 11 different characteristics that are common with people who are addicted. And think about these 11 characteristics and kind of have them in the back of your mind as you're talking to your children, as you're looking at your own life. So one would be that there's a hazardous use. You're using it in dangerous situations. There are social, interpersonal problems that are related to the use. Neglect of major roles in order to use. Withdrawal symptoms, hangovers, Tolerance increases. I need more to get the same effect. Cravings while anticipating use. A lot of times cravings is I'm thinking about it and preparing to use that. I use larger amounts and longer than I intended. I have repeated attempts to quit or to control my use. I increase my time spent using. I have physical, psychological problems that are related to use. And I have activities that I've given up in order to use. So if you think of those being 11 kind of checkpoints, if these things are happening, 1 or 2 is in that harmful use, 3 or 4, you're in the abuse stage, 5 or more, and you're talking about someone with dependence. So I think it's helpful to think about those different kinds of stages. So what sets our children up for using? And these are more bigger picture types of things. So what are those risk factors? One is we can genetically be more prone to that addiction process. There are differences. One person can use alcohol one weekend and then go live life normal. Somebody else uses it and then they're using it again, then they're using it again, and they can't stop. There are genetic differences. Trauma is really, I think, is one of the big ones, and I think of trauma as something that is too much that has happened in our life, and that the pain of trauma is still affecting us today. So when I'm talking to someone who's dealing with trauma, it's something that is still painful today that happened back then. It could be lots of little things. It could be the home I grew up in. It could be a time when I had a betrayal in my life. It could be a physical damage. Trauma is just something that's too much that gets in the way of my ability to function. So I have nightmares. I have people I avoid. There's situations when I hear a certain sound, I have a jumping reaction. When I have something comes up on the screen and it reminds me of something that was terrifying to me. When I get in the car and we drive past a certain place, I have something that just overwhelms me. Those are signs of trauma. And think of that as pain. It's pain. It's pain that is so much pain that it makes it hard to function in some places of my life. When our children have that type of trauma and they discover drugs or alcohol can relieve them of that pain, that's a major gateway to addiction. So one of the things that I've spent my life working on is helping people to heal from those traumas, because when you're able to heal from that trauma, then the need to find relief in alternative ways goes way down, and you develop resources of connecting in a way that God created us to be connected. Some other ways that are risk factors are the stress, the chronic pain, having learning disabilities, behavioral problems, psychological disorders, and then medical issues. So all of those things can lead us to needing or wanting more and more drugs and alcohol. Sometimes our family language of relationship, our inherited passive coping mechanisms, and a lack of active coping mechanisms, the skills of dealing with life as it is, the skills of being connected with people. Being connected is not easy, but it's something that can be learned. And so if you have good active coping skills, that really helps to not be drawn into the addiction patterns. And then there are some things that are just social structures that support addiction versus those that promote healthy living. There's a video you could look up on YouTube called Rat Park, and it's really disturbing, really. That's why I'm not going to show it here, but there's a connection of there are some structures. If we have support, if we have encouragement, if we have people giving us a purpose and a role and a community, a way of being connected and valued, that experience is almost like making us bulletproof to addiction. And the less of those that we have, the system really sets us up to being drawn into addiction. So that's a major piece of when people are dealing with addiction. So I want to show you a video. This is Kiwi and the Nugget. And I want you to think about your child and the factors that might be influencing your child. That desire to be connected, and maybe the pain and the suffering that they experience as part of the human experience. And your child is like this kiwi just walking through normal life, and then they run into the golden nugget. And so see what happens next. should be a kiwi on the screen. Do you see a kiwi? Okay. It's a hard video to watch, but it's one of the best ones I've come across for just very deeply and very compassionately describing and illustrating how alcohol and drugs can be so attractive at the front end, and then the price that we pay the further we go after that golden nugget. I just think it helps us to kind of connect also with some compassion with those who have reached those stages of use that life has become so destructive and so empty of joy that we get it a little bit better. So that's what I want to talk to you about next is what are the signs and the symptoms of substance use. And so this is really a little bit, we need to walk carefully with our children in this because looking just for the sign and just for the symptom and missing the child is one of the easiest errors we can make. And so having this information, we need to hold it carefully to inform us, but the first thing, the priority, is the connection with our child. So these symptoms are changes in behaviors. They're eating, sleeping, and socializing. It's also cravings, physically, emotionally uncomfortable, irritable, anxious, on edge, medication seeking. You're going to notice secrecy. There's a lot of lies, evasion of the truth, deception, manipulation, dishonesty, even to the point that it seems like they don't even know what the truth is anymore. Emotional imbalance of anger, shame, depression, paranoia, exuberance, mania, runaway train of thought. There's going to be an increase in compulsive behaviors. There could be a significant change in body weight. Sometimes you'll see diseases and sores and injuries develop. So these are things to look for. And you saw that kiwi, kind of the further they went, the more beat up they became. And that's going to be true for all of us who get involved with drugs and alcohol. So how do we respond? I really like this painting, The Hand of God by Young-Sung Kim. He's a Korean artist. And I think the priority is thinking about God's reaching out to us. He loved us first. And as God loved us, we're called to love one another. And I think this painting is our position with anyone who is suffering from addiction or abuse. We're reaching from what God has given us. We're loving and offering a hand to this person in a way that is to restore, to bring back to life. And so that's the position of our hearts. And so look for the signs. Before bringing up the subject, be sure that the person has a problem with substance abuse. Second, talk about the impact and don't judge them for their behaviors, but explain to them that you are concerned about their habits and that you are worried. It's important to separate the addict from the person. We can show love to the person and really hate the addiction. It's literally death in their life. But to be able to talk about that impact for yourself. The next thing is that there are treatment options. There are things that can be done, ways to help and encourage them to do that. Remember that connection is the antithesis to addiction. Remember that we are made for that connection. And so in the place of connection that's been hijacked, we also can do it in reverse. What was been hijacked can now be turned into connection. And so when we connect with our children, that's a major intervention to helping bulletproof their life from continued use. And one of the things I'd want to say is be bold in love. When you think about someone who's been injured and they're hurting, if you were to be disturbed by their screaming and their behaviors being nonsensical, you'd miss the point. But if you heard the screaming and asked them, where's the pain, and you find out there's a broken bone, then you treat the bone. I think there's a connection with that. With drug and alcohol use is usually the screaming, but it does really connect to something that is deeper. And if you can address it at that level, be bold in loving them. So there are levels of care, and we're going to wrap up here pretty quickly. Early interventions include education, behavior. You can become knowledgeable about alcohol and drug use. There's outpatient options like family therapy, individual family group. I've heard that there's a really solid counseling environment here, that there's actually available to all families here. You have counselors that are available. There's also Celebrate Recoveries in this community. Those are both really important resources. So we're about out of time, so I just want to show you a couple of things that have been useful to me as a, let me get to it here. I have some books up here at the front that I think are really good to address the connection and helping intervene between addiction. The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. This is a pioneering book that the strategies for parenting covered in that are really, really good. It's one of the best that I've seen as far as just interventions at an early age 12 specific strategies. And so if you're looking at your child going, we're not there yet, but I want to help bulletproof them, that's probably the one book I would recommend you get. And then this one is called The Anatomy of Peace, and this is by the Arbinger Institute. And this has been really instrumental in my life of just how interactions where we set one another up to fail or to succeed, and learning how to do relationships where we set each other up for life. So those are a couple of resources. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys being willing to consider these really hard topics and how important they are for your church and for your family. So thank you for loving your kids. Thank you for loving them and in this way. If you want to reach out to me, that's a good email for me, and that's a phone number for my office. And it's been a blessing to be here with you. Have a great day.